Welcome to Plenamente. This is a new experience for me to mix my native language, Portuguese, with English for this season. This is season 2, and I'm very pleased to have this conversation with Professor Warren Mansell. I've come to meet Warren at a training of a very interesting model that I've been sharing for the last few years, the 4Ds model. And it was a very delightful experience to get to know this way of work in psychology and to actually to know Professor Warren Mansell, like you will see, someone that can really help us with his knowledge, but also someone very approachable and humble. And this was very, very special for me. So I will just read a few sentences about his bio so you can get a glimpse of who Warren is. So he grew up in the small countryside town of Biggin Hill. Did I say it properly?
Biggin Hill, yeah.
Biggin Hill in the UK. And he developed a love for nature and science. And then he gained a first-class degree at the University of Cambridge and then a PhD at Oxford before training as a clinical psychologist at King's College London. He then spent most of his research career at University of Manchester, authoring over 200 peer-reviewed publications, including therapy manuals. Now he's currently at Curtin University since 2022, right? And he uses the scientific approach known as perceptual control theory. Also, I will say it just up front that you can also read more about his work and of one of the teams that he manages on ledbyexperience.org. So after this amazing resume, I will ask Warren to present himself because I always know that it's quite different to hear someone present itself by using his own words.
I mean, I guess I'll carry on where you left off in terms of explaining why I followed the route that I did. So you explained that I trained as a clinical psychologist. And my first form of therapy that I researched and learned was cognitive behavior therapy. And I think I was fascinated by the theories that informed CBT, but never quite satisfied with them, particularly how the behavioral side, which is kind of quite accurate and detailed analysis of behavior and learning, how did that map onto the cognitive side, which is more about beliefs and thoughts, etc. And so I was looking for a theory that would bridge that gap, as well as being aware that the humanistic approach, grounded in Carl Rogers' work, and before that, the psychodynamic, psychoanalytic schools, all had contributions, theoretical contributions, clinical contributions, that there are elements of them that made sense. There are elements of them that were not how I would practice, but some of their insights and their components, such as the kind of person-led nature of humanistic approach and the role of conflict in the psychoanalytic approach, were really compelling to me. And I thought, well, do these actually fit in with the cognitive and the behavioral? And so, yeah, I probably would have tried to put a theory together myself if I hadn't have come across perceptual control theory about 1998, I think. And when I came across it, read the core text, which is a 1973 book by a man called William T. Powers, who was actually a medical physicist with a degree in physics, not a psychologist, but there's a long story behind how all that worked. But essentially, there was a really clear description of this theory and the diagrams that really illustrated something that actually made sense to me, it wasn't just words, it wasn't just propositions. There was this technical elegance to the theory. And at its heart, a way of kind of linking the cognitive and the behavior, in the sense that what we see as behavior, what we see a person or another animal do, is their way of controlling their perception. Okay,
Okay,
perception
so
being a very, yeah,
you've taken this big dive into the model, right?
yeah,
Because my curiosity would be exactly for you to help us understand what is this theory in a way that anyone that will see and listen this can, oh, I know what he's talking about.
yeah. I mean, sometimes I have my demos that I can show
Yeah.
for this. I mean, one way I explain it to people is, um, not everyone knows this, but the household thermostat, what we use just to set the temperature of our air conditioning or our heating, is based. There we go.
I'm doing the demo part.
Yeah, is based on the homeostatic systems in our brains and bodies. So inside our brainstem, we have set points for our body temperature, which is why we keep our body temperature at this ideal level for all of the thinking and metabolism that we need to do. And how do we do that? I'm sure anyone who's read a high school textbook would know this. If we get too hot, then our body starts to sweat to cool us down. And if we get too cold, then our body starts to shiver to warm us up. So there's these behaviors that come online to control the sensed body temperature that's kind of sensed deep down inside our brainstem. And that just happens automatically, a bit like a household thermostat. And really, the idea of PCT is that the rest of the brain is doing the same thing. It's just controlling different variables, many of which are more complicated than just the current temperature. It might be the shape of a drawing that you want to reproduce on a page. It might be the distance you want to stand from somebody. It might be your perception of how clear you are when you're talking to other people.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that our brain is just, is organizing all of these different set points and ensuring that they all keep in flow with each other, don't conflict with each other, and allow us to achieve the goals, the set points that are really kind of long-standing and important. They're at the top level, and that we manage that by setting a whole cascade of goals going down to the point at which we're actually interacting with the world. So
Yeah.
when our body's controlling our body temperature, that's going through our bloodstream and through our muscles. But when we're controlling something like a tone of voice, we're still using our muscles. It's going out through the world. We're hearing it, and then it's cycling around like that.
There
So
is
we've got
so
all these cycles going on at once.
and there is so much on what you're saying, but because of time, I will just focus on one very particular word that you've been using the whole time, that is control, controlling, control. And I've read it, written by you and others, that maybe even we as a class psychologists have given this bad image of control for people. Can you just enlighten us a little bit on that one?
Yeah, I think when people say they're controlling something, or when they say they are a controlling person, what they're actually talking about is being in conflict. They are maybe want someone to do something and the other person doesn't really want to do it, but that's a
Yeah.
conflict. Or they want to control themselves, to say give up smoking, but there's another need inside them that actually needs to keep smoking to relieve stress. So that's conflict as well. So the times when people are actually talking about control is when it's made conscious, and when you're conscious of it, it's when you're trying hard to control, which is typically because you're in conflict with either another person or with yourself. But most control that we're doing happens automatically and we're not aware of it, and it just flows. So it's the sophistication of what I need to do just to put one word in front of another and make sense is control. But I am not thinking carefully about every word that I say and choosing it one by one, and I'm not really aware that I'm controlling all those words. What I'm aware that I'm trying to do is control this explanation to be understood. And then I'm piecing together the words to do it, but that's happening quite automatically and filling the gaps of what I need. And so control there are muscles all through our body keeping us in posture, keeping us sat upright, that are just automatically tensing and adjusting. If you stand on one leg, they do the same thing, but you can notice them a bit more obviously. And we don't have to be controlling those muscles consciously. Those muscles are dynamically adjusting on the fly to control something at a higher level, whether you're in balance, and when I'm speaking, whether I'm understood, etc. So it's interesting because a lot of psychologists try to distinguish between controlled processes and automatic processes. But according to PCT, control is automatic 99% of the time.
This takes me to one of my curiosities in this conversation, because when I first heard you speak about the 4Ds, that is one of the models that's using or is based on PCT, I was so impressed, and it all made sense. But then there were some very simple instructions that you were giving, and that was totally conflicting with the other models that I was having. And I started to talk to you because it was mind blowing for me, especially the part where you trust the person to be in control of her life, in her thoughts, and you work with her and you let her drive, and you go in the passenger seat. And it is not that in humanistic approaches that I also follow, they're not present, but there's this idea when you work in more cognitive models that there are some things that you need to do, some tasks, some challenges, some assumptions that are wrong, and you need help. You need to help people to see that. And this belief and the ability of the person to, if you have conversations with the person and if you help her understand those points of conflict, she will eventually flourish and be able to thrive. And so my question to you is, why is this model important for psychology today?
Yeah, it's very valuable. So when Bill Powers was developing the theory, he was involved in conversations with a friend of his to help understand the experiences that he was describing. And they just developed this question and answer method to understand how perception works. And then it was a lot longer down the line that he and colleagues realized that this could be a therapeutic approach. And it's one that really does justice to the fact that life is about control. And if you want to get back in control again, then when you're talking about your problems to another person, may they be a therapist or a friend, that you need to be in control of that process as you're describing the problem. And so, but it's not a fully person-centered approach in the sense that the other person just listens. The other person is listening so attentively and asking these curious questions that help the person with the problem notice it in more detail and more depth and more clarity. And so it's an interesting mix between the person-centered focus of the conversation, but that curious dialogue that pushes people to think more deeply and get in touch with, thoughts and feelings and images and memories that they might have just brushed off if the person listening hadn't have jumped in and said, well, what was that about? What's going through your mind just then, etc.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting way of keeping the person with the problem in the driving seat, but at the same time kind of providing this sort of energy with the questions that help them to explore further.
Yeah. And just to be clear about what I said previously, the thing that really got me was the do's and don'ts about the discovery conversation method. One
Mm,
way
mm,
of, I'm just saying this for the people seeing, that one way of having conversations inspiring the method of levels, the
mhm.
therapeutic approach based on PCT. And it was on the don't be over empathetic. And that was, oh, come on, that is so, what am I supposed to do? Don't do summaries, reflections, and all in me was like, what am I supposed to do? And to be in this specific place with the person and just to be connected, noticing the disruptions, listening carefully. And so I decided today I will not write a script. I will follow Warren throughout the conversation just to, to navigate with the model. But this is what it's quite
Yeah,
overwhelming
yeah,
for a trained therapist.
yeah, yeah. So it's not to say that those other things are bad things to do,
Yeah,
but what they do is take the focus away from that one focus of this form of therapy or conversation,
yeah,
which is to help that person keep the problem that they're bothered about in the focus of their conscious awareness and sustain it there and keep it there. Because the
yeah,
theory suggests that the longer that a person can focus on whatever is concerning them, the conflict often, then the greater the chances they are to notice new solutions, new perspectives. And that's a process called reorganization, which is kind of a
yes,
basic learning process. Um, and so by staying out of the way, but still asking questions frequently to help the person keep that focus going, allows them to get to places, if you like, that you wouldn't reach if you kind of came in with advice, or you sort of took the attention away from them and shared something with them and guessed at what they might be going through. It's pulling all of that back and just remaining authentically curious about what they're currently piecing together as they're talking through the problem.
yes. And as a super rookie, as I was listening to you, I had so many questions. I will just make a brief comment because I think we should talk about, as a final questions, about healthcare, because PCT has a
Mhm,
huge contribution to it. Uh, the thing is, when you were saying to keep the focus on the problem, and often we have so many models to distract the person from the model, and the sensitivity. This
mhm.
is quite difficult one for us Portuguese: sensitivity or sensibility. To be sensitive or sensible to understand,
Sensitive, I think. Sensitive, yeah. What are you
sensitive
trying to say?
to,
Yeah.
yeah, to understand if the person needs to focus, or if it is when it's too much,
Hmm.
to pause there and to help the person to regain well-being, like when we're going the 4Ds up and down. And I was just considering about that
Hmm.
probably comes with the maturity of using the model.
Yeah, I mean, so what I've been talking about is method of levels, which we've
Yeah,
packaged as what we call discovery talk for a wider range of people to use to listen to one another when they want to share a problem. Um, that is the long-term way to deal with
yeah,
um, losing control of something important in your life and getting it back together, getting to the bottom of it and getting back on track. But 4Ds is about validating the fact that there are other short term ways of getting back control that sometimes we need to do in the short term just because we have other priorities.
yeah,
And so we feel that it's a way to sort of validate the fact that people sometimes do distract themselves. People sometimes do training techniques just to kind of get the edge off an overwhelming feeling. Um, in the 4Ds approach, they're not treatments, they're not a long term thing, but they are ways that people can regain control, get back some well being in the short term, keep things going, whilst when they're ready, they can work on the long term material.
Yeah.
But we very rarely provide 4Ds on a one-to-one basis, because we find that when a person is there right in front of us, you can really listen and help them explore further. But when we deliver 4Ds, as you know, we do that to large groups of people,
Yeah.
sometimes 200 or 300, to get some key principles across.
Amazing. So the last question is, we are living in an era of chronic diseases, of so many types of challenges in terms of healthcare throughout the world. So, what is the contribution of PCT in terms of general healthcare?
It's kind of bigger than you might think. In the most recent handbook that I've put together with colleagues, we have like 3 authors in there talking about healthcare from a PCT perspective, including some basic kind of cleanliness within health services in one chapter, and health behaviour change. There's one on cancer and health behaviour. So people can look at those. But to take a big step back, and it's funny, I'm saying take a step back to take a step back on this, but essentially the solution is to take a step back. So much of what we do, not just within health, but also within politics, within the economy, is to engage and try and compete with some illness, with some other group, with some other company, and that's a conflict. So you find your enemy and you fight your enemy with whatever you've got, whether that be drugs in medicine, whether that be actual armory within another country, or whether it be your commercialization when you're competing in companies. And the world is full of these kind of conflicts. Some of them are fairly healthy, like when we have sporting competitions. Others are deeply unhealthy and are putting the whole planet at risk. But again and again, what we find when people are confronted with conflicts in their lives is the way to manage that is to immerse yourselves in the experience of that conflict and just delve deeper and understand deeper. And that's what we do when we listen to a client talking to the conflicts that they're going through in their lives. And it should be no different for anyone else, any other person who's got responsibilities in this world. And I've written a paper, for example, on mediation, using meta levels in mediation between conflicting parties, with a sociologist, Kent McClelland, who uses PCT. And I know he and I, and I'm sure many others, see this merit of this just simple approach of listening genuinely and asking questions genuinely. Okay?
Yeah.
Not because it's going to create some magic wand to solve everything, but if you're only going to do one thing and it's going to be a universal thing that's going to help, then listening and being curious and sustaining that as long as possible is going to be, I think, the single most important way out of many crises of conflict. There'll be lots of other solutions that come into those particular domains of their own kind. But the one thing that I think cuts across that is that we need people to be engaging with much more detail and depth and emotion and history around the conflicts that they're going through. Because, the more brains we've got working on this, the more chance that one of them is going to come up with another perspective on it, or another way to kind of broker a deal, or to kind of come up with a different form of treatment, or to kind of reverse a political conflict or disconnect. It's very ambitious, but that's kind of, I'm only really echoing the same ambitions that Bill Powers had for his theory right back in the 60s and 70s. And it almost speaks for itself, the fact that a theory like PCT isn't widely accepted because it has this paradox of complexity and simplicity and this deep thought that isn't typical of today's society.
We need norms to function, and usually it's easier as also a work psychologist. We like to normalize, for instance, the work we're doing, and there is so much that we cannot capture in our job descriptions, for instance. And I was reading this paper about how medical doctors would help each other to make more useful diagnoses, if this is the appropriate way to say it, with cancer patients. And one of the exercises they were doing is that they would have to say out loud the reasons why they were choosing their own logic and their reasons at each step, because they could listen to each other and then to really understand what are the reasons behind that. And also inspiring that, when I went to do my research when running the focus group, and I was talking about something very different, that was fruit and vegetables, but we were having these conversations on what are you doing and why you're taking this route or the other. And it's so interesting because, like you've been saying throughout this conversation, the level of complexity is so huge. Either you're saying a sentence or composing a box of fruit or performing brain surgery is so complex. The amount of things that you need to do in a very automatic way.
Yeah. And we're not going to solve that complexity by adding more complexity. No. We resolve it by a simple method to actually bring about change. And it's fascinating. It's interesting what you're saying there about the cancer diagnosis, and that open talking and questioning is also similar to in a group format that people do using the open dialogue approach, which started in Finland, which again is very similar philosophy to method levels around authentic curiosity and open expression. There's something quite incredible that our brain's capable of when we talk out loud, when we're listened to, and people genuinely want to know more about certain things that we're putting into words.
Yeah. So this was an amazing lesson. I don't know if I should call it a lesson, a masterclass, something like that. I'm very thankful for you giving me your time and giving us in Portugal time to learn from you. And this was my conversation with Professor Warren Mansell. So bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.